And I'm hoping, yes. Okay, so this is our agenda. So we've got the AGM. And then after that, we've got Matt Maitland. Welcome, Matt. I think you're on the call. Talking about Shakespeare and Tāwharanui open sanctuaries. And then we're going to have some breakout sessions. I can make it work. And then coming back to a sharing session and then close the meeting. So the first up for this is our first AGM of the society. And Rachel's very kindly put together a combined chair and manager report, which she has sent to you. And so we're not going to give you the whole report. We are just going to run through a little bit. So on the right is a picture of the original steering group at Orewa Marae, Te Haringa Waka Marae. And we have an excellent strategic plan that is being communally developed by all the people involved. And these are our principles. So we understand our obligations under Te Tiriti. We acknowledge the Māori worldview. We are transparent in our relationships. We respect diversity. We recognise that we recognise science and good decisions. We're totally focused on the community and young people and people of all ages and all ethnicities. So our vision: nature is healthy and our native species are flourishing. Our communities value nature and are empowered to work together to protect and sorry, I'm doing two things at once. I'm admitting people to the meeting and trying to do this. So our mahi is innovative and connected to the vision for thriving nature across Auckland, including the Northwest Wild Link, Pest Free Okura, Sea Change for the Hauriki Gulf, and Predator Free 2050. Our mission is that we are community-led and we aim to partner with whānau, hapu, iwi, and bring together, empower and grow the network of groups, projects, neighbourhoods, individuals, schools, businesses, and other organisations working to eradicate pests, restore and protect native habitats, and improve water quality across the Hibiscus and Bays local port area. So our ecological goals are predator-free, self-sustaining Indigenous ecosystems, habitat connections, and healthy waterways. This is how Restore Hibiscus and Bays works. So around the outside is the network, and that's all of you. All the groups that are active in the Hibiscus and Bays area form the network, and from the network is elected a committee of the society. And the committee of the society is composed, the steering group is composed of the committee and relevant people who are invited from council, DOC, and other places. So, and that is Restore Hibiscus and Bays. So driven by the community, driven by the network, run by the network, for the network. So these arrows, this is the benefit coming back to you. So we have, like I said, I think a really, really good strategic plan. Te Ao Māori focus, the communities and network to educate communities and raise awareness and build the network. Productive relationships. So we don't call ourselves an umbrella group, we're a support group. And we foster productive relationships with the other entities that are working in Hibiscus and Bays and outside of, actually. Ki uta ki tai refers to catchment scale action. That means from the mountains to the sea, and we strongly believe that we work in catchments, and of which we have 34 in our local board area. Monitoring, so to expand and share what we know. to work out whether what we're doing is actually making a difference, and to build resources and the team so that RHB is sustainable and enduring. So this is a great slide. All-time data to October 21 since, is this all-time, Rachel, or since we've been going? Since September.
Started recording it and had a system in place to record it, which is September 2020.
So 1 year, 2 million weeds. How about that? 4,500 volunteer hours, 465 community members engaged, 36,000 square meters of weed controlled by eco contractors, 10 new sites under comprehensive predator control, and 5,000 or 4,000 meters of native planting. Well done, team. That's awesome. A big shout out to our sponsors and partners, Hibiscus and Bays, Local Board, Council, Foundation North, Lotteries, Browns Bay Rotary, Million Meters, Templeton, Browns Bay Medical Centre, Taitea Trust, Browns Bay Bahai, Million Meters through the Sustainable Business Network and their Jobs for Nature funding through DOC, and Heart of the Bays, who have umbrellaed us until this point financially and in other ways, and all you wonderful people. So I'm going to pass over to Neil, who's going to give us the financial report. You there, Neil? You'll have to unmute if you're not unmuted. You are unmuted. You are muted. You have to unmute yourself.
There we go.
There we go.
Thank you. Now, as you all know from a note on the summary of donations and payments, we didn't have our own bank account in the year under review. That's the year to 30th of June 2021. Our funds were managed by East Coast Bays Community Project, but were very closely analysed by Rachel for both the receipts from our donors and the payments that we made to and on behalf of environmental projects and wages. Now, this pie chart clearly shows the major donors to our organisation. If we go to the, is there any more you want to say about that, Richard? It's fairly clear, and a picture's worth 1,000 words.
So roughly half our income is from Auckland Council, and the rest is from other agencies.
Yes, yes. Hibiscus Bays and Auckland Council are pretty well, nearly half, as you say. So that's the total income that we received in that year to June, 30th of June 2021. The next screen, Richard, will be the payments, yes. So we received some $300,000 and we paid away $173,000 of it. And you'll see the large chunk of the $173,000 is remuneration for staff and other contractors. And you will also see the other payments made. So that is how the $173,000 was paid away. At 30th of June 2021, we had some $251,000 in the bank, being the difference between what we'd received and paid away, and also the balance that was held for us at the beginning of our financial year, 1st of July 2020. as from the 2nd of August, we had our own bank account, and now all the money that was held by East Coast Bays Community Trust has been passed over to our society. It's now in our bank account, except for one amount, which is the lotteries grant. And for a number of management reasons, that $79,000 has been held and will be paid away by the community project. At the moment, we have about $220,000 in the bank. If you are happy, Richard, I think that covers it all.
Thank you, Neil. Is there any questions for Neil on the money? Or any questions on the chair and manager's report? Okay. So I'm going to hand over to Rachel now.
Kia ora, thanks, Richard, and thank you, Neil. So the next item on the agenda is the election of officers. So firstly, the chairperson, Richard Hursthouse, has been nominated for the position of chairperson again. Is there a seconder? Do we have a seconder on the line?
Aye.
Who was that? Can you just confirm?
Oh, I was one person, Chris.
Chris. Okay, so there's only one nomination, so I'm very pleased to declare that Richard is re-elected as chairperson. And now deputy chairperson, Pauline Smith, has been nominated again for the position of deputy chair. Do we have a seconder?
I'm biased, but if I can second, I will.
Thanks, Jenny. Okay, so only one nomination, so I'm pleased to declare that Pauline is elected as deputy chair. And now on to the treasurer. So one nomination again, Neil Taylor. Do we have a seconder?
Yep, me, John.
Thanks, John. So one nomination, so I'm pleased to declare, thankfully, that Neil is treasurer again. Thank you, Neil. And now I move that, well, actually, first of all, going through this list of names. So most of these people are currently on our committee. We've had one person who's had to step down, that's Stephen from SOSI, due to work commitments. So thank you, Stephen, for all his hard work. But we're very thankful that we've had two others that have stepped up and kindly agreed to be nominated for the committee, and that's Brittany Pierce and Marie Morrison. So this is our new list of nominees for the steering committee. And so I move that all of these people that are willing to stand for the committee be elected as one body. So if are there any further nominations from the floor this evening? If there is, speak now. Okay, so do we have a seconder for this, for electing this one body of the committee?
Yes, I'll second that. Pauline Smith.
Thanks, Pauline. And those, I don't know, do we say those in favour, please say aye online? Any against? Okay, carried, great. So the steering committee are duly elected. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Rachel. Well done. The next item on the agenda is general business. So is there any general business, any discussion, any questions that anybody's got? You'll have to unmute yourself. And
do we need to confirm Rachel as secretary of the committee?
Are you still on that list, are you?
No, I'm not on the list.
Well, Rachel is practically the secretary. If you would like to nominate Rachel Max as secretary of the steering committee, that would be fine.
We have a limit of 12
Yeah.
for the committee according to our constitution.
Yeah. So we have this slight issue that we have a limit of 12 in the constitution. So effectively, Rachel is the secretary anyway by virtue of being the manager. So I'm happy that she does it that way. If others are, if there's any discussion on that, let me know.
Yeah.
That's fine.
Richard, could we just have those two the reports accepted, passed and accepted from the meeting, please?
Sure. Can I just get an answer on the other one first? Does anybody object to that? Effectively, Rachel is our secretary because she does all the secretarial work. Okay, I take silence as being assent. That's good. Chris Bettany has moved that the chairperson's and treasurer's reports be accepted. That is a procedural issue. Are there any objections to that? Put your hand up.
It was Pauline Smith, not Chris.
Okay, well, yeah.
Yeah,
I think Chris got in first in the chat. So.
Okay.
Moved by Chris, seconded by Pauline.
Pauline, I just wrote it down, that's all.
Oh, okay.
It's okay.
Any objections to that? No. Great. So any other general business questions? Now's your chance. Okay, so I'd just like to pass a vote of thanks to our staff effectively, particularly Rachel, who has been doing a wonderful job over the last couple of years, and whose ability to write policy, sorry, I'm going to mute you all, write policy and funding applications, and those policies inform the funding applications, and her ability to bring in money is second to none in my view. So just massive thanks, Rachel. And also like to acknowledge our other team, people in our team, Kane, who's been doing a fantastic job as our number one restoration advisor, or our first restoration advisor. And I'd like to welcome Deb Colson and Joe Crawford, who've just come onto the team. And in somewhat trying circumstances, having to start as restoration advisors in a lockdown situation is not an easy thing to have to come into. So acknowledging you all, thank you very much. So that brings us to the end of the AGM. And so the next job is for Rachel to introduce Matt.
Kia ora. Thanks, Richard. Thanks, Neil. Thank you to the rest of the steering committee for your support and guidance over the last year. Much appreciated, and it's really, invaluable for the work that the team are able to then put into place. So thanks a lot. So yeah, it's a pleasure to introduce Matt Maitland, who's Senior Ranger at Auckland Council for the 2 pest-free fenced peninsula sanctuaries up in northern Auckland, so Tāwharanui and Shakespeare. So he works very closely with SOSI and also TOSI to do pest eradication, translocations, revegetation and other projects, and he's going to run us through some of their work now. So Matt, are you there? I think I saw your name earlier.
Yes, I am. Thank you very much, Rachel. Kia ora tātou. Really nice to see a lot of you there. Lots of familiar faces in the group. Also, congratulations on where Restore Hibiscus and Bays has got to. I do recall joining you at Te Herenga Waka and doing some of your brainstorming and mapping out this audacious thing to join up some of the groups that were already in existence. And if I'm not, I think I might. That some other groups have sprung into existence since that time, or have decided to join you along the way. So that's fantastic. As Rachel said, I'm at Maitland. I've been involved in restoration conservation for 25 or so years. I've been fortunate in my career to work in some of our subantarctic and subtropical islands, the Kermadec and the Snares, the back end of national parks in the South Island. I was attracted to this current role as a Senior Ranger for Open Sanctuaries with Auckland Council in 2007, partly through, as we often do, a bit of dissatisfaction with the job I was doing at the time, but also the opportunity to come to North Auckland and work in an environment with fragmented landscapes, to work with people, so that's both with lots and lots of people around, and also with people, the public, and the volunteers, community, etc., actively involved in the work being done, and also to work with some fencing technology, because I'd always worked on strictly offshore islands or the back of beyond. I've enjoyed my time here, and I'm just going to run you through a PowerPoint presentation that I have used previously, where I want to just talk about a couple of things. And I was going to work out, okay, so let's get them on the right part there, back to here, and try the share screen thing, and that tells me that I choose that one there, and then I say share, and I'll make it into a slideshow. Cool. Richard is the one remaining face I can see now, so you're going to be the one I look around the room for the friendly faces I'm doing my public talking. Okay, this is a talk I prepared a little while ago. And sorry, I'd also like to acknowledge the presence of several of the local board members there. It's really neat to see that connection between the community and the organisations that support them. So well done for that. So restoring resilience in terrestrial ecosystems. This is here because we often get a bit tangled up in this nature around the terminology of conservation. And it can be infuriating, but it's also incredibly important. You know, I noticed the use of the word eradicate, and for me, that's a very absolute term. You know, it means the removal of all remaining animals and hopefully the preclusion of them being able to get back. It's a worthy goal, and I think you go through pest suppression, zero density on your way towards that. We've also seen some new stuff into the lexicon of conservation language, and that is around what I think are interventionist statements. So the language of predator-free and pest-free have crept into our language. And to be perfectly honest, in some ways, that's a relatively meaningless kind of term, because it's an action rather than an outcome. And I think what we have to do is focus on the why do we want to be predator-free. And so for most of the audience tonight, I expect that means more, you know, fruit on the trees, more birds in the bush, more lizards in the ground. But it might be that people are looking for things such as a lack of harassment for their pet companion animals. It might be about disease in agricultural systems for part of our productive economy. You know, so there's a whole bunch of things around this sort of stuff, why people would want to tackle these. And I do encourage people to move past the intervention part to focus upon the outcome. Why are we doing this? You know, we want to see kaka present on the mainland until they start ripping up our fruit trees, and then we get a bit concerned. Anyway, I want to thank these people that I get to work alongside on a daily basis. Shakespeare Open Sanctuary Society, Tāwharanui Open Sanctuary Society, and of course my employer, the Auckland Council, who work in partnership with them. And for Shakespeare particularly, I also want to acknowledge the New Zealand Defence Force and Watercare Services, because their lands are included in this sanctuary there, allowing it to be a nice round circular lump of land. So the idea of resilience here is, it's a term that's crept into modern day language. It has its origins in the study of physics. It's about the ability for a body to recover its size and shape. Yeah, but what you can see there is, after deformation, particularly by compressive stress, and you're seeing there that things are impacting upon the shape and form that this thing wants to take, and it wants to be able to bounce back. So we talk about mental resilience, we talk about physical resilience, etc., along the way. And you can see there's some synonyms I've thrown in there about flexibility and pliableness, but particularly suppleness, plasticity, elasticity. So these are things about coming back to something resembling the original shape. In terms of ecological resilience, I use this term because we're going to suffer insults along the way. And one of the challenges in the restoration field is the thing where a lot of people get hung up on: restore to what? We know that we're missing huge numbers of species of flora and fauna, so we can't have a pre-human ecosystem even if we wanted it, unless we indulge in some wonderful things like de-extinction processes, etc. What we can, though, is we can look at the systems that we've got and make the most of them. And so first of all, we want to make sure that these systems or ecosystems persist, that we have wetlands, that we have forests, that we have scrublands and gumlands and all the rest of it. We want the whole range. We want them to be able to respond to perturbations, whether that be a pest or predator outbreak, whether it be a climate change event, whether it be a fire. Lots of Auckland is low-lying, and those ecosystems would be hammered by a tsunami, for example. So where does the reserves reside, and how will they come back into these changed landscapes? You want to be able to withstand damage, so there's certain levels of tolerance there, and we will know that there are certain points from which you cannot recover. So that's things like functional extinction in animal species, whereby they get so few and far between that they can't effectively find each other to breed. If they do, they are genetically depleted so that they have risks of inbreeding depression for what populations might come from that. And then we have some remarkable success stories which just fly in the face of that wisdom, such as Old Blue, the matriarch of the black robin on the Chatham Islands. Fascinating to see a conservation story told on the 6 o'clock news when I was a child, in that regard. Process is as important as the inventory there. That is what makes an ecosystem. It's the interconnections that do it. And that ability to absorb these changes and respond, and hopefully to be able to respond in a timely fashion. And of course, I should tell you that terrestrial ecosystems, of course, are places on land with living things that interact. So we're not talking about the sea here or the sky. We've narrowed down our brief. I then get into this notion of tipping points. So what are the things that we want to have in place for us to be able to undertake the interventions that lead to recovery of our native ecosystems? So they are generally beneficiary wildlife. People often latch onto a few things in their neighbourhood or their local patch they want to see recover, or that were there when they were a child and they want to see return, and they know there's a source nearby. Often it's about the animal pest threats. When people start seeing rats rummaging their compost heap, and they start seeing the annoyance of that, and then start projecting forward to what that might mean for some of the things that they also care about, such as their fruit trees or the birds that visit their garden, or birds on offshore islands. Habitats can be degraded beyond points when they cannot recover. And we particularly see this in aquatic ecosystems with such things such as nitrification or eutrophication of systems, whereby they simply get to a point that they cannot recover from that. They become effectively dead. But I think the key one of all of these is those social attitudes. So that is the drive to care, the drive to nurture, but also around the social acceptability of the interventions you're going to put in place. Does this mean you're going to be stomping around people's backyards? Does it mean you're going to be using toxins which might be put their domestic companion animals at risk? Do we get into some of those bigger, curlier conversations which are loaded with crazy rhetoric such as the 1080 debate, the genetic modification debate, gene drive systems, etc. Yeah, these are things which are tools available to us, and they are only available to us through social acceptance. Yeah, and I think lockdowns, vaccinations, these have some very strong parallels in modern time. They're interventions built around biosecurity principles. It's really easy for someone like me to get my head around it. It's hard for someone who is seeing the long arm of government telling them what to do and restricting their freedoms to understand this. Right, this is a slide I've borrowed or stolen from John Innes of Landcare Research, Manaaki Whenua. And what he's focused upon is this, exploring this idea of the objectives of restoration, because we know that not everything is there. So we look for ecological integrity, and what we're particularly looking for is the idea that we have Indigenous dominance. The system we're looking after is largely driven by the native systems at place. So to put that into perspective, some of you may come to Shakespeare Open Sanctuary, you go, cool, I'm off to go see a wildlife sanctuary. You arrive and you find yourself in the middle of a farm with some pockets of bush around it and stuff. And so that's where you're going, yeah, we can't change it all overnight. We perhaps don't want to change all of that, particularly when we look at productive landscapes, which are becoming more and more part of the predator-free or pest-free future. But what we want to do is make sure that the natives are driving the processes in the places that we want to give over to that. It also gets away from the idea that we don't need to be exclusive in these things. So when people talk about the farmland at Tāwharanui, to me, I can point out to them that the pasture land is actually very, very useful for takahe that graze, for patiki that graze, for kiwi that probe for invertebrates in amongst the stolons of the kaikuyu. So these are some where they're not mutually exclusive. Possibly the best example if I had of this was back in, a long time ago, visiting Te Hoiori or Maud Island in Pelorus Sound. And there I went to visit a kakapo nest, which was underneath a pine tree, where the female was going off the nest at night to feed on Spanish heath in order to provision her chick. And you sort of go, okay, so we need native forests for what exactly? And so what you have there is the fact that the species benefit was there with all those things, but what you had, it was out of context with the native system or some of those ecological connections that you might have had there. Species occupancy. So this is the idea that you've dominated with the native stuff, and that you're trying to get the full breadth of the species range that could have or should have been there. So this means that they can either are already in place, can immigrate from nearby environments, or possibly to be translocated if that is the case. Sometimes we translocate what we call analogues. So we no longer have the North Island takahe, we have the mohiol, we only have the South Island version, but it performs the same ecological niche. So therefore it can be quite comfortable here in the North Island. Shakespeare has the southern version of the little spotted kiwi. The northern version of it is extinct. So that's the one that we have present there. Then environmental representation. So that's the distribution of the biota across all of those different systems. So a frustration I find sometimes is people involved in ecological restoration often want to race straight towards an endpoint of climax podocarp forest with kokako living in them. And along the way, if you're in too much of a hurry there, you miss out on some of those ecotone edges where you might have lizards present, some of those gumland systems where you have various flora and fauna that can't survive once you start getting a changed soil structure and a different ecological community on site. So I would say, love those untidy margins. They're really productive environments. They will hold some of the squitty little herbs that someone will actually discover as extinct in the Auckland region. You will find invertebrates and lizards and stuff that you didn't know existed there. Right, so these are into some of the areas that I work in. So that's Shakespeare from the northeast, looking at the New Zealand Defence Force land with the regional park in the background, and you can see that hard urban boundary at the western edge, which is where we bump into the Pest Free Hibiscus Coast work, or Pest Free Peninsula work undertaken there. Tāwharanui, again taken from the east, looking down the peninsula. And I'm not sure if you can see my mouse, but the pest-proof fence runs through at about that point there, isolating. In both cases here, isolating 500-odd-ish hectares of land from the mainland. Pest-proof fencing technology to separate them from the mainland. Okay, this is the idea that you have a fence route beyond which you have your benefit area. So in this case, to the right of the image is the benefit area. And in the blue patch there is a buffer zone to help try and protect those gains. And the topography of Shakespeare is a real gift. You know, a little wee skinny isthmus joining it, only 50 hectares to defend, should be quite easy and straightforward, you say. I'm very grateful for that. Tāwharanui, with its larger funnel outside of the fence and landform, is substantially more problematic, but both succeed. We did the major intervention with the aerial poisoning of the animal pest suite there. This was our animal pest suite, 10 mammals there, so ship rats, Norway rats and mice, weasel, stoat and ferret from the muscular family, feral cats, European hedgehogs, Australian brushtail possums, and I'm missing one, the European rabbit there. Tāwharanui, we were able to reduce it down to this post the aerial eradication to rabbits were at very low densities, but bounced back unsurprisingly in the absence of predators. Hedgehogs persisted for a surprisingly long time, but have not been recorded on site now for 7 years, I'd like to say. So I'm quite pleased with that. Yeah, surprisingly difficult ones. Shakespeare, we went quite a bit better, and this was the situation we ended up with, only mice persisting there. I think there's a good time to mention here that, you know, once you start intervening with pest control, you've got to be prepared for the consequences that flow from it. Okay, so when we clobber stoats, we tend to get more rats. When we clobber rats, we tend to get more mice. And you've got to be mindful of that ecological cascade, the mesopredator release, as it's known in the literature, and be quite conscious of it. So if you're really concerned about things that will be, you know, the focus of your area is upon some little chafer beetle that is consumed by mice, then clobbering your stoats and rats is probably the wrong way to go about it, because, you know, you will inevitably end up with more mice that will prey upon that. We know through this mesopredator release that at Tāwharanui, when we gave the world over to the mice, that we ended up with some incredibly high densities, the highest densities ever recorded in mainland New Zealand. We ended up with some of the fattest mice recorded in mainland New Zealand. And they also got to the point where, not quite statistically significant, but very close to it, that they appeared to be more fecund than, you know, or able to breed more often than other mice on mainland New Zealand. And that is because they had the entirety of the resource there. However, I'm quite comfortable that within that 588 hectares of Tāwharanui Open Sanctuary, if there is an area that I want to protect certain values from mice, I can do it on the scale that those things operate at. Things that are impacted by mice operate on a similar scale to the mice, so therefore you can achieve a lot of benefit by protecting a half hectare patch of the value you're looking for, if that's the case. It's not all about just killing things. There's also that stuff about, as you guys do, about returning the habitat there. So this is a case of Tāwharanui, happens with Shakespeare as well, on-site nurseries, planting days, more habitat. So at both sites, we create about 2 hectares of new habitat per year. And I can tell you that at a place at Tāwharanui, within 2 years of planting in one particular area, that particular forest was then occupied by bellbird back on the mainland. They're now Tāwharanui's most common forest species. Saddleback or tieki moved into there. Whitehead moved into there, which were another species missing at the beginning. We had spots crake, you know, so and kiwi in there, all within 2 years. So it can be quite quick. These sanctuaries are not alone. In my part-time volunteering job, I'm the chair of Sanctuaries in New Zealand, and these are our constituent groups around the country. They're fundamentally community-led groups whereby they're trying to do the things which remove most of the pests, restore most of the things that could be restored, and have a strong element of community involvement in it. So that's the case there. And we have been very lucky to work alongside Rochelle Binney from Manaaki Whenua Landcare Research. Rochelle is a mathematician, she has done amazingly to grab our disparate and incompatible data sets from a whole bunch of sanctuaries and try and jam them together in a way that makes sense, so they can talk to each other, and we can look at the cumulative effect across a bunch of sanctuaries of our stuff. So this is the idealized version of what she's got there. Basically, the effect size, which is things such as animal abundance or nesting success or counts or whatever. If it's positive, so plus greater than 0, you're making a positive difference. If it's below that, things are going backwards. So when she looked across all sanctuaries, regardless of the management intervention, she was able to see that some of them have got quite long data sets here. So from their origin, they have been able to substantially increase that effect size along the way. So you can see that it's a logarithmic scale there, so that the effect gets greater with time. I think it's a log scale, never mind that. But what you're seeing is that gains increase over time, but also you get these perturbations. Now, some of the reason why those error bars are greater in the last 7 or 8 years of the data set is because more and more sanctuaries got to that age. Fewer sanctuaries are of that age, so the variability within the data was greater. But you can see there's a very clear trend as per that trend line plotted. So you intervene, you make a difference. Fantastic. That's exactly what people are hoping for. It's the validation of why they go through this exercise. Once we started looking into the type of intervention, we could see that there was a bit of a marked difference between the sort of traditional mainland island style of trapping, baiting operations and the fenced sanctuaries. And the fences include the ring fence sanctuaries and also peninsula fence sanctuaries, such as Tāwharanui and Shakespeare. The ring fences are the Zealandias, Maungatautaris, Bushy Park, Rotakari, etc. So what you can see there is that the steepness of the curve, so therefore the effect, is greater in the fenced environments than it is in the mainland island style. And I think what you can see there by looking at that stuff is that the shallower pitch of that mainland island style suggests that it will have lesser resilience, okay? They're probably a more vulnerable species in some of those fenced sanctuaries. But when you're working hard at it and you're making small gains over 10 years, then catastrophic events can have a substantially impactful, that's a stupid sentence, impactful impact. And so what I think is really important there, and to link it back to your work, is that that network that you've got provides that resilience across a landscape scale, okay? You've got pockets of bush spread from the North Shore through to the Hibiscus Coast, which are protected so that if they are experiencing these damaging events, hopefully they are experiencing the same damaging events at the same time, so they can supplement and support each other through some connectedness there. This graph, which is a absolute mess, again stolen from Manaaki Whenua, was based around the Cape City, and what it was trying to look at was the fact that you had these dependencies. So what you've got on the left-hand side of the graph there is the pest species, okay, and then on the right-hand side in the midpoint, so this column here, starting whitehead, etc., is the kind of pest animals that will impact upon those. You know, so we know that a stoat, for example, impacts upon every single one of those benefit species listed there. Whereas there was only a single interaction being able to be shown there between pigs and, interestingly, the New Zealand falcon, or karearea. Okay, and again, probably fairly obvious when you think about it. They nest on the ground. They come at you with talons and loud, squawky voices, but ultimately it's all bluff and bluster. And if you're a pig, you'll put through it. But what we also have on the right-hand side here is this stuff of a whole bunch of other interventions that are necessary. And so this is undertaken in a Hawke's Bay landscape stuff where there is large barren patches without a whole lot of native systems there. So it's about planting for connectivity, to undertake public relations to counter tree damage. So if you have kaka booming through your efforts, you may find yourselves in the same place as Wellington City Council and Zealandia, having to apologise to the public for the successes that you've had, to encourage them not to feed them nuts from the deck, because then you will create both deficiencies in the animals themselves, but a problem for yourself in an ongoing manner because they keep coming back. Dog management, wetland creation. So these are some of these additional things that some of these pest animal, benefit species need to thrive in the environment. Okay. And I think when you can also look through that is going, okay, so if I have something like, so I'll pick one at the top of the list here, which is the whitehead. I can see that it's got lines connecting it across to the stoat and the shiprat, and also whatever that pinky line is, the possum, okay? So if I just go out and do stoat control, I've only taken out one of the 3 threats to that particular species. Yeah, and what I don't know is whether or not I will make the residual numbers of that pest species greater in abundance, because it no longer has some of the competitive pressure from another species there, and also probably predative pressure from a stoat chomping on rats there. So this is that sort of holistic view I'm trying to encourage. So we're going back to the sites that we're trying to look after and trying to see the things that we're trying to come from it. And so by protecting some of these systems here, we start creating the opportunities for the restoration trajectory to start taking care of itself. So I started this with framing it as about terrestrial ecosystems, but you know, seems a bit silly to say no ecosystem is an island or whatever, but yeah, everything is connected. And so this is the seabird part. So New Zealand's ecology and its economy, particularly in the agricultural and forestry side of things, is built upon millions and millions of years of seabird guano being deposited on land by seabirds, which go out to sea and feed up on marine nutrient and come back to land in the evenings and pop it out, okay? We've replaced that with top dressing and superphosphates and the like of it, okay? But it's that basic fertility that comes there, which has been propped up our economy and our ecology. And it's fundamentally broken. Seabirds are now largely absent from mainland New Zealand. When we talk about this, people are often surprised to find that they used to be a long way inland. So sometimes people would see them in things like the Canterbury foothills of the Southern Alps. And for those of you who know that area, you're a long way from the sea. The Kāweka Ranges in Hawke's Bay, you're a long way from the sea. We're all North Aucklanders. We're probably used to hearing what I call sky goats or Cook's petrel flying overhead at night with their little maniacal laugh. Massive distances are nothing for seabirds. You know, they will spend years at sea. They will travel great distances, and they will have these favoured fishing spots which are genetically imprinted upon them. So encouraging those seabirds to come back is fantastic. You know, and in this case here, it's just done by simply playing the music or the sound of the seabirds themselves to make them think that it's an attractive place to land. So it's the idea when you're strolling down the street and you're in a foreign town and you're trying to work out where to eat, and you look at the restaurants and, you know, the busy ones look, you know, like worth having a crack at because clearly people are going there, and you sort of go, well, why would I go and sit in an empty one? So if you've got the pest control at a point whereby you think that these things can then prosper, we've got these amazing offshore islands that are burgeoning with seabirds which can no longer fit there. So we're seeing them pushed across to try and find new habitats. So we're seeing them to make landfall, and it's quite interesting. You know, so they're both sticky out peninsulas, Tāwharanui and Shakespeare, but both saw the return of grey-faced petrel relatively early in their restoration trajectory. Both also saw the return of fluttering shearwater and diving petrel. And interestingly, they were the first and second mainland Auckland sites to have those two species recorded, which to me just sounds like a bit of a nonsense that they would happen to arrive in the places we're managing. I think what we had there was a function of looking for them. And I think what you will see is that these birds are trying their luck on any number of headlands up and down our coast, you know, and probably in most cases not succeeding. And so if we can, you know, the work that you guys do can help encourage them to succeed. The return of the seabird poo comes there, and then starts kickstarting things. You start seeing soil being turned over by the seabirds' activity themselves. You see this nutrient coming in, and you're seeing the soil chemistry change and the suitability for a whole bunch of different plant communities coming along. It doesn't bother some of our locals, these loud noises there. So you have places where you've got kiwi, and in a relatively short time, so kiwi have been at Tāwharanui since 2007, I think. So 13, 14 years, and the place is bulging with them. You know, we have excess birds there now where we're starting to see some summer drought pressures. We're seeing carrying capacity issues, and we're delighted that the Tamahanga trappers have got an application approved to move some of the Tāwharanui kiwi into that land managed by the Forest Bridge Trust, which crosses the east to the west coast of northern Rodney. This also shows here, and it's a timescale which I haven't kept up with, but what we're seeing here is the trajectory of the seabird community at Tāwharanui. And I think the key point to notice here is that those first 3 or 4 years were really glacially slow progress, okay? But about 2013, when you can see it starting to kick up, is when some of those first 2009 or 8 birds started to return to have some of their families of their own. So you get this site fidelity there, you get the parents have survived and produced young. Enough of those young have survived their journeys at sea to come back and to carry on that process there. And then you start seeing a massive kick up of that growth curve. It's not deliberate. This next point I'm going to tell you, but somewhere off to the edge of this curve here is a decline. Okay, and that is when we had a Norway rat population established around our seabirds at Tāwharanui and took out in one season 6 or 8 chicks, which is quite a severe dent in it. But luckily we were at the point on the curve there where we'd built up that resilience. We still have found the birds who will come back. Their parents are fine, and it's usually adult or parental viability that drives population success. The number of young you make is all well and good, but they have to survive to be able to have their own chance themselves in future. We often underestimate how long New Zealand native birds live for as well. So North Island brown kiwi should easily do 60 years. Even some of our smaller forest birds, such as robin or saddleback, will do 8 to 10 years each. So they've got quite a few chances there, and they don't always have to succeed every single time. And then here's this next part here, which is the Duversell gecko. And so once you start having systems that are recovered with some of that marine nutrient coming back in, that resilience is there, whereby it starts becoming more suitable for some of that absent fauna to be introduced. And you can see here as well that there's also those red mites around the gecko's eyes. And that is because the parasitology of the animal is part, they are an ecosystem of themselves, and they're sustaining a whole bunch of things which should exist there. So it's very easy to get captured by the large charismatic kakapo and takahe of the world. I encourage you to go and read up on things like micro snails. There's a retired malacologist working out of the Palmerston North Department of Conservation Office who will sort through samples of soil for you, and pretty much every ice cream container of soil that they go through, they find half a dozen new species at least. There is more diversity in a square meter or a cubic meter of soil underneath your feet generally than there is in all the trees above the ground in a forest system. These kind of things are stuff that we hear regularly, but we sort of forget them, and most of it we don't understand the function that it serves. Just to draw on that below ground process thing a little bit, we know that when we're doing restoration plantings, that the mycorrhizal community, so that's the fungal communities below surface, depending on the land use that has gone before our planting, may or may not be intact. And so when we've had sustained cattle grazing on these areas, so compaction, a whole lot more light coming into the environment, drying and shrinking and cracking, that kind of stuff, the mycorrhizae tend to die off, and so they retreat to the corners from the bush remnants. So when we plant adjacent to a bush remnant, these things just naturally filter through into the planted area. When we go and plant an orphan paddock in the middle of nowhere that's been farmed for decades, it might need a little bit of extra love to help it get along those processes there. So it's similar to that sort of thing you think of when you've taken a substantial illness, strong course of antibiotics and stuff around. There's impacts upon the gut microbiome, for example. We know that there's something's a bit out of kilter, things aren't quite right, and needs a little bit of help. And then we get back to this part here to say thanks to those partners that we have. So that was my very quick sort of run through of the resilience part. And I did want to just quickly mention some stuff whereby in the earlier stages of the sanctuary, now I have to work out how to stop sharing that. Okay. In the early days of the sanctuary, we had great success with keeping pest animals out When recursions arrive, we deal to them relatively quickly and move on to the next thing. And over time, our incursions have become more and more problematic. So they've become stubborn and resistant to being removed. Now, some of that might be because we've embraced technologies which allow us better to understand when we have pest animals inside these sanctuaries. So using camera technology, using dogs, using thermal cameras, we have a much better understanding of what is there. And I'm quite happy to accept that my previous state of peace with the site might have been through ignorance of not knowing exactly what was there. We also know, though, that from certain stages, through the process of pest control, we're effectively applying selection pressure. This is the whole Darwinian story playing out, and our role in that. And so from that, we get certain animals who simply don't want to go into trap boxes. Okay, and if they're the population that is left behind, then those are the genes which dominate the next population there, and so you start getting a skew towards that. You have negative experiences. So this is one where there's a plug there saying community conservation is fantastic. I think there's a little bit of risk of it being oversold as being awfully easy. Anyone who's spent more than 5 minutes doing it knows that actually it's quite challenging. And I've been quite interested by the last 18 months teaching me how little I knew in this space, despite having done it quite intensively for 20 odd years. So there's always stuff to learn there. And so my key plug for you involved in the community work is the quality. It's the same mantra I give to my team when they're undertaking pest control. And the strongest piece of guidance I give in that space is when you leave a trap set, okay, you don't check traps to see how many things you've caught, okay, because they're just an impediment to catching the next one. It's already dead. You've done your job. Well done, okay? Now you've got to be ready for the next one. So your job is to make sure that that trap is ready and perfect for the next animal that wants to come along, okay? A key part I try to impart upon the trappers I work with is when you leave it, you own it, okay? It's quite right for the next person coming along to call you out upon the standard that they find if they think it's substandard, okay? That's, mank left on the treadle plate, egg baits broken beside the trap being wobbly on the ground, sharp sprags of wire around the nest, the entrance there. No one's immune from this. No one's perfect. We found one trap at Tāwharanui, which had been in the field, had been checked, I don't know how many, upon the regular cycle for about 4 years before someone discovered that actually the internal baffle did not have a hole in it. Okay, we were never going to catch in that particular one. Hundreds of traps, a simple oversight, but it was something how it was overlooked every single month for years, and that's the part which is starting to get quite intolerable, So, yep, mistakes happen. So you leave it, you own it. I always try also for my trappers to focus on the fact of don't worry about the line length. Don't worry about how many traps you have to service, okay? If you only have time today to get through 4 really well, that is fantastic. And then you tell someone about the part that is remaining to be done. It's either you come back and do it yourself or they find someone else for it, because those 4 have been done really well, okay? And so you've got at least 4 that are good to go for the next time, okay? What you haven't got is a whole bunch which have been done in a half-assed fashion and are no good to anyone for anything. That's what just to pass on there. I'm going to share another screen here with you because I just want to show some stuff. So many of you will have heard of the Shakespeare Stoat event we've been having. Yes, I think that's correct. Okay, so I'll try and find this. Share this particular one here. So this is where it's, stoats have come and gone from Shakespeare, been found inside, been trapped, we moved on. So we had 4 musculid incursions between our eradication in 2011 and March of 2020, I think it was. Yeah. And then we had a stoat arrive on around about St. Patrick's Day in 2020. And for those of you who know the story of stoat biology, they are hardwired. They tend to get impregnated in the den before they leave. So when a female arrives somewhere, she's almost guaranteed pregnant. And that was the case here. She arrived, she set up camp, she dropped a litter, and then we went from having one stoat to having an unknown number. And a litter size of stoats can be up to 11, so it was sort of quite daunting. This is a subset of some of that work there, and these animals were tricky. Yeah, so they simply did not want to go into our lovely wooden trap boxes. And I got a bit infuriated with people who kept telling me, "Oh, you just need to set it like this." You go, "Look, I'm sorry, these animals don't want to go into the box." And so we had to be quite creative. And in being quite creative, we also had to be quite bold and undertake some things which were quite risky. But ultimately, what we had there was, once we moved from this suppression model, and suppression is adequate for most of the species we're trying to look after in mainland New Zealand, and it's those extra vulnerable things such as tiaki and little spotted kiwi, etc., which have these absolute lack of tolerance for them. Or certain animals are cotton on to a particular resource. So if a stoat gets a liking for grey warbler in your patch and you can't get it, you're going to run out of grey warbler fairly quickly. But a key thing that made a difference for us was the ability to use a certified stoat scat dog. So it goes around and it finds the poo of stoats there, and it found them all over the place there. And then eventually we were able to run those stoats scats through the genetics lab with Ecogene to work out how many animals might have produced those scats. And you don't have to look at it, but this table in the middle here just sort of shows the range of different alleles and whatnot that we've got there, and the different animals on the left-hand side that might have left them behind. And most importantly, once we started catching animals, to be able to take them back to that list and check them off the list. And so what we got to the point there was saying, we know who Mum was. She was the one labelled Princess Munch in the slide above. And we know that there is only one possible parent-offspring relationship between all those stoats there, which is that all of the other animals are the offspring of Princess Munch. We're able to tell the father, and we're able to tell that there is nothing representative of that father's DNA in any of the scats found on site or in any of the animals we caught. So it fits that model of the animal being pregnant before she arrived. So that fitted the model quite nicely. We couldn't tell sibling relationships. That would have required a much bigger data set to understand the level of relatedness between animals on in the surrounding landscape and how common these alleles will be within them. We were able to take one of the trapped females and send her to the Lincoln lab of Manaki Whenua. They opened her up, they had a look at her reproductive system and said she has never ovulated. So it was great, because then we had this fact that we actually did not have a male present on site when this female was denning to impregnate all of those young. So they were not fitting the perfect model of stoat biology within our site. So they effectively had, they weren't pregnant that year. Their male siblings were juvenile and not mature yet. That's a little safeguard that's built into the breeding ecology of stoats. And so they wouldn't get mature until about now then. And then we get to this point where we eventually decided we don't have any pregnant females on site. In fact, the DNA has told us that we've removed all of our stoats except for possibly one male. And so we got to the point there where we said, okay, we're chasing one male, and we haven't seen any sign of that animal since August 22nd. And so we get to the next part, which is that in a situation such as the sanctuary we manage, damn things can leave anytime they like, because the fence is built one way, not two-way. And so I get back to that hardest job in ecology, which is counting zero, and trying to work out the level of confidence I need to be able to say the job is done and we can move on from that. So that's pretty much my little yarn on ecological resilience and some of the challenges with pest control. I understand you've got a bit of a breakout space and discussion from here on, Rachel. But if the time allows, I'm happy to answer any questions that might arise from that.
Yeah, that would be great, Matt. Thank you. Has anyone got any questions for Matt?
I just want to say, kia ora, thank you, Matt. That was an awesome talk to get a little bit more insight on the projects you work on, and just the insane amount of detail that goes into all those projects. It's quite inspiring. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Kane. And I don't want to gloss over the fact that that's the stuff where we have to drill into that level of intensity for certain problematic animals. our buffer zone is still working fine, and most of those animals that might become our next invaders are actually getting caught in the traps and responding to normal pest control activities there. So I think that's important. I neglected to tell the little story of Northland Kiwi, and that is that from the Whangarei Kiwi Sanctuary established by the Department of Conservation in the late 90s, early 2000s, they set up predator control around a bunch of reserves around Whangarei, and they had fantastic success in year 1, pretty good success year 2, and it dwindled over time. And so what came from that is that the chick productivity wasn't being sustained, and the implication from it was that the trapping pressure was fantastic in year 1, and then had decreasing effectiveness over time, with the suggestion that what was happening was leaving the survivors behind who didn't want to play with those traps. And so Northland developed a model whereby for their Kiwi sanctuaries and Kiwi sites, they try and do about 5 years of trapping and then try and have a intervention with something like a 1080 bait station pulse or use of second generation anticoagulants to have a secondary poisoning effect there, to have a different way and a different pathway to some of those more problematic animals. Okay, so if you don't want to come to a trap, please eat one of our nice glow-in-the-dark mice and finish yourself off that way.
Great. Oh, thank you, Matt. I know that many of us, I certainly really appreciate the science perspective that you brought to that presentation. It's awesome. You covered so many hundreds of different things that I've never even considered before. So thank you.
Oh, my pleasure.
Any questions?
Very
Yes.
quickly. Hi, Matt. I'm from Torbay, Waiheke. Should we be worried about the proliferation of this little brown lizard? I think it's an Aussie import. Yeah, it's a little brown thing that's sort of got a slight shine to it.
Yes, the rainbow skink. The interesting thing there where we thought, oh, let's vilify it and call it the plague skink. Lamprophilus delicata, beautiful animal in Eastern Australia, not wanted here. Look, I think this is a really good example of when science really helps, because we started from a perspective when that egg-laying skink arrived into New Zealand. We said, okay, look, it's a diurnal skink, it lays eggs, therefore it's got a numerical competitive advantage over our natives who are often nocturnal or less active in the day and only bear a couple of live young per year. So we went, okay, numbers game, they're all over it. Okay, we started to see them increase in number. Shakespeare has a really good reptile fauna. It's the most diverse reptile fauna on mainland Auckland. And then it also had the rainbow skink arrive. And so we monitored the populations of those during time. So in the presence of good mammalian pest control, but still the presence of elevated numbers of mice, our native skinks were able to compete or outcompete the native skink when they started from good numbers, okay? That same data set has been revisited 10 years later by Dr. James Reardon of the Department of Conservation, because they wanted to see if that initial pattern followed through over time, and to help inform a cost-benefit analysis assessment for the value of keeping the rainbow skink out of the South Island beyond first principles of ecology. You know, so first principles tell us it's unwanted, okay? But then once we start delving into it, we go, actually, for most of our systems, most of our species, it won't be that problematic. Yeah. Treat them a bit like the sparrows and thrushes in your garden and just enjoy them. That's what I say.
And we've got another question from Dick. He asks, what, if anything, can our various groups do to encourage seabirds to come to the mainland?
Okay, so I think there's a couple of things you can do there. One is to go and look, see what's already happening in those sites. Okay, so moonless, misty nights are some of the best. Okay, you know, when it's heavy fog, we see piles of seabirds underneath the Sky Tower and the warehouse at Snell's Beach. They love coming to light systems under misty conditions. Second thing is to look logically at some of the headlands and the logical landing places that you might have for them. Focus on some of the seabirds which you already have. So dotterels and variable oyster catchers are shorebirds, not seabirds, because they don't spend all or part of their life at sea. Penguins, however, are your most common seabird, okay? And I think by encouraging those with nesting boxes, etc., and good predator control, good dog control, then you start heading down that pathway. If you make it suitable for them, then perhaps some of the others follow. And I think we don't know yet where the effects of making pest-free Gulf islands, pest-free peninsulas sticking out into the Gulf, and what they can do for elevating seabird numbers that are looking for new homes, where that's going to lead to.
Any further questions? You can shout out or put it in the chat. I think that's it. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Matt. That's excellent. So awesome. Cool.
Good luck to you all. And I hope you have some good time in your little breakout sessions now.
Thank you.
Thanks very much, Matt.
Cool. And hopefully I'll see a lot of you in person next time. This whole online thing is getting a bit old. Yeah. Cool. Excellent. Keep it up.
Good, Matt. Thank you.
Thanks.
So do you want to move into the breakout rooms, Rachel?
Yes. So we're going to try something a bit new this time and try and replicate sort of conversations that we might be otherwise having over pizza. So we're going to try and go into breakout rooms. I think of about 4 in each room, and chat about anything you want. But we thought, you know, you might want to discuss a little bit about the presentation you've just heard, or talk about your experiences of nature during lockdown, what you've been doing with pest control in your backyard, what you're looking forward to coming out of lockdown, or anything really. So we have allocated, I think, 15 minutes. We are running a bit